came out in 2008, but if you go back and read this little parliamentary report that came out in 2005, these people already knew this. They already said this. And these are just members of parliament, elected people. Sorry, I have to take that back a moment because I want to read one more quote. So I'm just going to read you a quote from this 2005 report from our parliamentary committee. And this is after hearing a number of hearings about what can Canada do to stop always hearing these terrible stories. And this quote was, "These hearings have underlined the fact that mining activities in some developing countries have had adverse effects on local host communities, especially where regulations governing the mining sector and its impact on the economic and social well-being of employees and local residents, as well as on the environment, are weak or non-existent, or where they are not enforced." So that was the beginning point for the parliamentary committee to come up with some recommendations. And I want to run through some of these reports and just say here are some key things that came out of these reports or didn't. And I don't have enough time to go into a lot of detail. So the Ski-Fake report, that's this small parliamentary report, it really addressed the issue that Ruggie calls the governance gap, and is in this report more or less recognized as an accountability gap. This report actually calls for regulation. It calls for Canada to regulate. And in particular, it calls for government accountability. It says the regulation should condition government support for our companies, that's financial support and political support, on our companies meeting human rights obligations and meeting high environmental standards. So the regulation would be around the government's accountability to Canadians for how the government spends our taxpayer dollars when it supports these companies. This report is also really important because it also calls for legal reform. So this addresses the issue that Ruggie raised again about sanctioning and reparation. So this report calls for legal reform, and Catherine really helps us understand what the problem is. The problem is that no cases will be heard in Canada. If the people in Guatemala brought the case against Goldcorp here in Canada, it would not be heard here. It would be sent back to Guatemala. And we know that it's very likely that in Guatemala, with the kind of political power and economic power of that company, that the case would not be heard properly. So this committee called for legal reform so that cases could be heard in Canada. So then we had the roundtables. Lots of talk. During the roundtables, immediately, the very first thing we were told, no regulation can come out of this process. There will be no regulation. So the government's response is a policy response, but there's no regulation. The other thing that the industry fought against, and industry and government fought against, was any legal reform. There should be no legal reform in Canada so that we can sue companies in Canada. Those were two things they really fought against. In fact, they also fought, believe it or not, against having comprehensive human rights incorporated in the standards. That was the last battle we fought in December of 2006 when they didn't want human rights comprehensive human rights in the standards. And that's when the civil society members almost walked out of the room. I mean, it was very tense, and we basically said, that's it, we're leaving. And they said, okay. They put human rights in the standards. The government has now responded to the roundtable report, and human rights got taken back out, which is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So keep that in mind. They fought against regulation, they fought against legal reform, they also fought against human rights, but that was put back in. So now, the roundtable report was 2007. Now this year, we've had two responses. We've had the government's response and we've had Bill C-300. So again, I'm just going to really make this brief. The government's response removed anything of value for civil society. I mean, during the roundtables, we walked away from many things that our parliament told us we should have. We walked away from regulation, we walked away from legal reform. As civil society, we did that. We made concessions. Those concessions we made for an accountability mechanism in the final report, in our final report. We had an accountability mechanism that would allow people to bring complaints in Canada. Those complaints would be investigated by an ombudsman and a compliance review committee. And if the complaints were found to be valid, in the worst cases, there could be withholding of government financial and political support. So there was a sanction. There was a possible sanction. And there was possible accountability of Canadian taxpayer resources as asked for in the parliamentary report. And for those things, we gave up regulation, we gave up legal reform. The government's response that came this year removed all sanctions, removed all possibility of conditioning of government support. It's completely useless. It's worse than useless, but I don't have time to explain that to you. So, nothing but disappointment there. But then there's Bill C-300. Bill C-300, again, first of all, includes a comprehensive human rights in the standards, so that's good. It provides for a complaints mechanism, and it provides for conditioning of public support. So if a company is found out of compliance with the standards, the Canadian government agencies like the Export Development Canada and CPP, and we want to add in later CEDA and some others, cannot give money, Canadian taxpayer money, to a company that is out of compliance with the standards. And also cannot provide political support through our embassies, which is very important support. So that's Bill C-300. And Bill C-300 is going through Parliament right now. I testified before the committee yesterday. The Conservatives, of course, are completely opposed to it. The Liberals are divided, left wing of the Liberal Party, right wing of the Liberal Party. The Bloc Québécois is solid in support, and the NDP is solid in support. So we have a minority government. Each MP can make a difference now. There was a vote already on April 22nd, there was a vote in the House of Commons, and 137 MPs voted in favor of Bill C-300. So that's 4, and Ignacio walked out. Oh, Ignacio, a lot of people walked out, and many Liberals voted against it. But that was only 4 votes that made the difference. What happens, the process is there is a vote, and then it goes back to the committee to debate the bill. And then it has to go back for another vote. So right now it's in the debating stage. And we're using this time to try to reach out to every MP we can and say, you have to vote for this bill. So if you know who your MP is, and particularly if it's a Liberal. The Conservatives are lost. Don't even worry about that. One, Michael Chung from Mississauga. One Conservative voted for the bill. We don't know why. We think maybe he's put his hand up at the wrong moment. Yeah, and that's not really fair, because actually we did hear later that no, it was really his decision. So there's one Conservative. The Bloc and the NDP are solid, as far as we know. But it's the Liberals that are dancing. Sure.
Can I just say we have sample letters out there? If you don't know who your MP is, I have a map.
You guys are way ahead of me. So, yeah, okay, so I'll just wrap this up. So what I really wanted to say in the end around this, and it brings us back to Catherine's presentation, is if you really think about what industry is saying,